This next chapter has the rare distinction of being named after a Jerry Lee Lewis song. A whole lot of shaking going on. So it's unusual for a Dhamma book to have references from one of the wild men of rock and roll being part of their form. But it's referring to the reverberations through the 10,000-fold universal system that occurred following the Buddha's teaching, and then the insight that arose within Venerable Kandanya. So the Pali here reads, Ayancha dasa sahasi lokadhatu sankampi sampakampi sampavedi. And then one of Ajahn Sucitto's most glorious and intricate and symmetrical creations, here this wonderful mandala of different reverberating colours with the Buddha at the centre, and this sense of the resonating and reverberation of the teaching throughout the universal system, as it said, from the lowest realms, these dark interstitial spaces where the light of the sun never shines, and beings in there never even see each other, they're so dark and dismal, all the way up into the most rarefied, formless realms of the upper reaches of the Brahma deities, the formless Brahma deities, and this reverberation shakes the whole universe. The impact of the Dhamma wheel being set in motion. So ayancha dasa sahasi lokadhatu sankampi sampakampi sampavedi. And this 10,000-fold world system shook and rocked and quaked. We've seen the various ways in which the 10,000-fold world system can be experienced. In this painting I return to the system of the Five Condors to portray it as something that can be known. Everything that can be sensed, perceived or conceived comes within the range of form, feeling, perception, mind formations and sense consciousness. This summarizes the experience of the world in a way that makes it something to work on, rather than as a measureless cosmos in which we feel lost. And once again, that's resonating this, the world is that we experience is the Buddhist definition of the world. So as I was quoting a few times, this very significant passage where the Buddha says that in the world whereby one is a conceiver of the world and a perceiver of the world, that is called the world in this Dhamma and dispensation. So that through which one is a conceiver of the world and a perceiver of the world, that's called the world. So the world is our experience of the world. So, and then in another teaching, the Buddha says, what is the world? The eye is the world, visual objects are the world, eye consciousness is the world. The ear is the world, hearing is the world, hearing consciousness is the world. And so too, that's the world that we know is all that we can say about the world. And this is also similarly in the realm of physics nowadays, since the last 30 or 40 years, that you can't really talk about, at the subatomic level of reality, you can't talk about an observer or an experimenter looking at an independent phenomenon, but rather the experimenter is a participator rather than an observer, that the means of observing creates the pattern of what is observed. And so that it's one of those intriguing and shouldn't be surprising discoveries that objectivity was something that was partial and dependent, and that it's a kind of conceit that we developed at the beginning of the scientific revolution in the back end of the 17th century, that we could be an independent observer of the world, and that what we are seeing is an unbiased version of reality. And the more closely we look at things, and particularly at the subatomic levels of reality, that the way in which you're looking precisely and intimately affects what is seen, what is measured, even by machines. It's not just the human observation, but what the way the machines work tells you that gives you a particular picture, and so that that's a very useful principle to take to heart, that what we call the world, because we're so used to thinking of the world is buildings, trees, mountains, sky, planets. We just had this solar eclipse today. Oh look, it's out there. It's this wonderful, amazing thing out there, and so that's how we conceive, or we paint a picture of the world or the cosmos. But to reiterate that the Buddha was a phenomenologist, that he's saying it's not saying that there is no basis upon which those perceptions or conceptions are formed, that what we call the four elements, the four mahadhatu, earth, water, fire and wind, they constitute the qualities of the material world, or material reality, that our perceptions are based upon. But when you ask, well, what's really there? when we talk about matter, what's really there? That word "really" is heavily loaded, because we can only, through our senses, our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind, we can only produce a small and sketchy representation of that. And like I was saying in the Dhamma talk last night, not at the subatomic but at the sort of cosmic level of astrophysics, that the world that we perceive, both material and immaterial, so in terms of matter and energy, that the mass of the known universe, what we can see and detect through our senses and our machines, only accounts for 4% of the mass of the known universe. 26% of that is made up of dark matter. 70% is made up of dark energy. Only 4% of what we know is like protons and neutrons, electrons, and other particles and forms of energy that are understood and known about. 96%, we haven't got a clue what it is. We just call it dark. And so that right there in the world of science, they're also saying, what we are seeing, what we're perceiving, this is just a tiny proportion, a tiny little fragment of the actuality. And so in this whole chapter, when Ajahn Sucitto is talking about the whole universe shaking and quaking and rocking through the effect of the Buddha's insight, it's not just through the galaxy of the Milky Way, our own galaxy, or out into the Andromeda galaxy and the far reaches of space, but it's through the many dimensions of the universe as we experience it through the five Condors, from Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara to Vijnana. And once again, we've also got in the picture, we've got these Celtic knotwork motifs. We've got a couple of the five disciples during the time after the Buddha's enlightenment, and then his teaching of the five disciples. It describes a scenario whereby he would stay in the deer park at Isipatana, and he would give instruction and guidance to one or two of them, and the other two or three would go out on alms. They would collect food for all six of them, and they would bring back food in the morning, and that's what they would live on. So you just have, rather than the five friends and disciples of the Buddha, you've only got a couple gathered here, but that's according to the accounts of those weeks when he was giving teachings to them. And this little Celtic knotwork motifs are still here, also having their own resonance from previous images. And around you have the darkness of the forest, with the radiance and the reverberations are sort of resonating out into the green darkness of the forest, and then up into the blue and star-filled reaches of space above. This analysis of the Khandhas is represented by 5 approximately concentric bands vibrating around the presence of the Buddha. The Four Noble Truths emanate out from his still center through that vibrating realm. The innermost band represents Rupa Khanda. So this is around the central area here. Physical form, which is relatively stable and clearly defined. Our most easily discernible aspect is our physical body. Subsequent khandas, comprising the nama and vijnana categories of experience, are of the mind and are more convoluted. These mental khandas all arise together. Although we talk about them as separate, actually they are four aspects of a whole. After rupa is vedana, feeling, of which there are three kinds: pleasant, neutral, and unpleasant. The next is sanya, perception or associative recognition, which occurs at the moment of knowing something. We feel it, and then we recognize what that feeling signifies. Warmth, for example. That's sanya. Then there's a mental formation. Quote, my body is warm, unquote. A mental feeling, pleasant, arises, followed by various mental formations born of happiness, ease, and so on. These mental formations comprise the fourth khanda, known as sankhara. These mental formations include thoughts, emotions, visions, and the like which occur within sense consciousness, vijnana, the fifth khanda. Sanya tends to produce sankhara. The mind begins to chatter about the perceptions that have arisen. Then a further layer of feelings and perceptions arise, based upon which other sankhara are created. Sankhara are the formations that conscious self-views are founded upon. Our habit or our attachment is towards establishing a reality out of perceptions, what we denote as agreeable, friendly, necessary, disgusting, and so on. We build up a network of these through life, and our views and attitudes, the positions that our mind chatter, complain, and feel excited from, are based on these. I, quote unquote, am the apparent agent of all this, or the oppressed host to it all. This generally is how the self is created within sense consciousness. The interweaving of the khandas, most notably of perceptions and mind formations, is what gives rise to the sense of a person, who is at first created by those forms and then becomes the helpless victim of them. And he has a little footnote there saying the process of this is outlined in the extract from the Madhupindika Sutta, the sweet nugget, quoted in chapter 14. So the movements of mind that operate within this system tend towards the inference of a very real self, although that self is constantly changing in dimension and expression. The effect is like that of a kaleidoscope, in which the same fundamental phenomena get shifted around, but due to the internal mirror are always being perceived as forming a single coherent unit. Our internal mirror, or should be mirrors, it's like two mirrors that are at a 60-degree angle to each other. The internal mirror is the mind. The mind is turned towards the world system in a particular way that reflects a self. However, in that arrangement, the mind is only able to see one set of conditions arising at a time, each set producing a different self: a wise me, a hurt me, a tender me, a stern me, etc. So the picture that appears in time is a movie of many selves, in precarious balance and frequent conflict. Earlier readings covered the five khandas and their nature and their form and what they represent. A couple of things to say about that. Even though he distinguishes the nama khandas as in a way separate from the rupa khanda, I feel it's a bit more helpful to, rather than thinking that they are intrinsically different, although the rupa has the quality of material form and the nama khandas or the mental khandas are immaterial, they're non-material, they're just of mind. It's more helpful to see the whole of the five khandas as a kind of spectrum, from the most coarse and sort of tangible and rough to the most refined, and also the term five aggregates is a common translation. Khanda literally means a heap or a lump. So, like your shoulder is a khanda, or a pile of rocks would be a khanda. It's just a lump or a heap or a group. And so one easy way of sort of figuring these is to think of going to the builder's merchant, and at one end of the spectrum you've got the broken bricks and old bits of concrete, which is like the hardcore that you would put in as road fill and filling up potholes. And then you've got, that would be representing the Rupa Khanda. And then each subsequent bin at the builder's merchant has more and more sort of refined material. So then you have, going from the Rupa Khanda, the big lumps of broken brick and lumps of concrete as the hardcore. Then you've got, and the next one you've got the coarse gravel, so that it's more like it's not as large as broken bricks, but it's more sort of small rocks and large gravel. That's the Vedana Khanda. Then the Sanya would be the fine gravel, and then the Sankara Khanda would be the coarse sand, and then Vijnana Khanda would be the fine sand or soft sand. And so that it's basically the same stuff, really. It's all patterns of consciousness, but going from sort of the dense and large formed aggregates, going through more and more refined ones to the most subtle. So that's one mental image that you can use, seeing it as a spectrum. Also, there's a particular teaching, it's a dialogue between two of the Buddha's disciples. If I'm remembering correctly, it's Arahant Nun Dhammadina and her former husband Visakha. And Visakha's come to ask his former wife, who's a nun and an enlightened being, some Dhamma questions. And he's asked about the five khandhas and says, feeling, perception, and consciousness. So Vedana, Sanya, and Vijnana. So are they completely separate from each other? Are they separate things, or are they actually conjoined? Can you really make a clear dividing line between them, or are they somehow overlapping? And then the Teri Dhammadina then replies, they are conjoined, not disjoined. You can't divide them out completely from each other, because that which you feel, you perceive, and that which you perceive, you cognize. So that like if you have a feeling of, like saying, feeling comfortable or uncomfortable, you can say, well, it's a feeling. It comes under the Vedana category, but it's also something that's being perceived. It's like body. There's the body sense, the quality of physical feeling, pottabha, is being sensed. So it's also kind of a perception, but also it's also a pattern of sense consciousness. And so that she says that they are conjoined, not disjoined. You can't entirely separate them out from each other. So maybe having the five khandhas in separate bins is not quite right. Maybe just having sort of rough heaps that overlap each other in the builder's yard is another way of perceiving it or arranging it. So that the Buddha deliberately used also the terms like khanda as an ordinary household term. He tried to avoid very refined or unique spiritual terminology, which it seems that within his own time the Vedas employed quite a lot of that, as they still you find within philosophical expressions, both in Eastern and Western philosophical schools. You get long and complicated, intricate terms that average people can't understand, like ontological or hermeneutics and such like. You go, huh? What's a hermeneutic when you meet one? And or soteriological. You go, where's the dictionary? Because it's a long word, it has a particular meaning, but an average person doesn't know what it's talking about. So the Buddha tended to avoid that kind of technical or over-refined language, or the language that the average person wouldn't know, and use things like khanda, being a lump or a heap or a group. Nibbana just means to cool down, so that represents a sense of being cooled or not being agitated or heated up about things. So, for example, if you just boiled a pot full of rice, you would leave it on the side to nibbana for a bit, so it would cool down before it was, because it was too hot to serve. People would burn themselves if they ate it straight away. So you put it to one side for a few minutes to nibbana. So it's an ordinary household term that people would understand. So in this way, he was trying to speak in a fashion that ordinary people could relate to, and then get a sense for what was being talked about, whether you were from an educated Brahmin background, or whether you were a farmer, or whether you were someone who was grown up in a merchant household. You'd be able to understand and make sense of what he's saying and the principles he's trying to describe. Now, here Ajahn Sucitto is talking about the feeling of I that arises in relationship to sense experience and thought. So that rather than in terms of Dhamma, we would say there is thinking, or there is remembering, or there is seeing, there is hearing, there is feeling, and when the mind is say guided by wisdom, by satipanya, mindfulness and wisdom, then that's how things are recognized. There is hearing, there is feeling, there is choosing, and without ascribing those to a person, I or a me or a mine, who's the owner. Most of the time, that's not what happens, but it's rather, I feel, I understand, I don't understand, I like, I don't like, I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm full, I'm comfortable, I'm uncomfortable. The I am comes in. So that, when we talk about the khandhas, in a way, the full term for them is the upadana khandhas, like the groups that are grasped at, and that are upadana means clinging or grasping. So that the things that the mind grasps at and also identify, and that grasping it also implies a quality of identifying. So a way of when we do the morning chanting and we go through the list of the five khandhas, one of the ways of translating that panchupadana khandha dukkha is the five focuses of the grasping mind are unsatisfactory, or are dukkha, so that when the mind grasps that or identifies, so identification with the body, identification with feelings, identification with perceptions and so on, they are dukkha, or they create unsatisfactoriness, because that is described, just the very way of describing them as upadana khandhas, and that they are dukkha because I am the body, I am this. I'm comfortable. I'm uncomfortable. I'm seeing. I'm hearing. I'm remembering. I'm thinking. I'm choosing. I'm worrying. I'm excited. That the dukkha comes from the I amness that gets created out of that grasping. So that's such a strong habit of the way that the mind that's confused by ignorance has in relationship to the five khandhas. We take it to be very normal. It's completely matter of fact. I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm going, I'm coming. I've got plans. I remember, and so on. And so that identification habit is immensely strong. But this is exactly what insight meditation, vipassana, is directed at, sort of highlighting that and seeing that. That's not what's happening. Look. There isn't really an I who is hearing. There's hearing. There isn't really a me who owns this thought. Who owns this pattern of visual consciousness or feeling consciousness. There's feeling arises and passes away. There's seeing arises and passes away. There's understanding arises and passes away, or confusion arises and passes away. And to say there's a me who's the owner, a me who's the doer, the actor, the experiencer, that is something that is being added on. If there's a clear exploration and seeing, then it's recognized, there isn't really a person here that's the doer, that is the owner of this body and these feelings and thoughts and so on. And as Ajahn Sucitto puts it here, the mind turns towards the world system in a particular way that reflects the self. That's the habit. Me in here, the world out there, and so on. A wise me, a hurt me, a tender me, a stern me. We keep creating these me's out of memory, out of attachment, out of fear, out of desire, out of habit, and sustain those through the force of attachment and clinging. This view is shaken by the teachings of the Buddha, that I am in here and that's the world out there, and I'm the experiencer and the doer. I am the actor in my own drama. This view is shaken by the teachings of the Buddha. If we have experienced the self-view as unsatisfying, we begin to watch its expressions more closely in order to understand why. The central core of this view originates with an assumption rooted in ignorance that there is a being or a thing which is continuous or has some unchangeable aspects. Cultivation of watchfulness dispels the ignorance. With attention, we can notice that what makes up this view is an energy, a tendency, arising according to inclinations of which we are only vaguely aware. This energy, attachment or upadana, is the nuclear force that binds everything together and is dependent on ignorance. With knowing, the objects that attachment wants to hold on to are seen as essentially impermanent, incapable of being held. And attachment itself is also changeable. We're not constantly experiencing attachment to any one thing. The subtlest attachment, the view that there is something to attach to, is the most deeply ingrained. As one abides more in truth, even this subtlest attachment fades. Also, there's an interesting comment that makes at one point. He says, if you want to attach to something, if you want to identify with something, it's much more sensible to attach and identify with the body, because the body, at least in some form, sticks around for 80 or 100 years, so it's got a reasonable degree of coherence and some kind of permanence, but the mind is totally fleeting and ephemeral, evanescent, just like a monkey jumping through the branches of a tree from one branch to another, to another, to another. So don't attach, if you want to attach, don't attach to the mind, but at least attach to something that's going to hold itself together for a little while. Insight into the realm of the five khandhas that we take as reality reveals that what we experience is an artifact of feelings, perceptions, and mental formations, catalyzed by the presence, i.e. consciousness, of form. This is another way of expressing the codependency of name and form, nama and rupa, and consciousness, vijnana. So that's also referring to the way that they are depicted in the expressions of dependent origination, avijja paccaya sankhara, ignorance conditions formation, sankhara paccaya vijnana, so formations, volitional mental formations condition consciousness, vijnana paccaya nama rupa, so that the consciousness conditions name and form, and nama and rupa, body and mind. And in one particular sutta, rather than starting off at ignorance, actually it's one of the largest, most substantial teachings on dependent origination, the Maha Nidana Sutta, which is number 14, I think, in the Digha Nikaya. It starts off at aging and death, and then follows the whole chain. What does death depend on? Death depends on birth. What does birth depend on? Birth depends on becoming. What does becoming depend on? Becoming depends on clinging. What does the clinging depend on? Clinging depends on craving, and so forth. All the way back to, you come down to nama rupa, body and mind. What does nama rupa depend on? Consciousness. What does consciousness depend on? Consciousness depends on nama rupa. And then the cycle turns back upon itself. And so that it sort of reaches down to nama rupa and vijnana, and just represents that the two of those in a way supporting and co-conditioning, co-creating each other. And in a different teaching, Venerable Sariputta likens that relationship of vijnana and nama rupa like it's called the two bundles of reeds. So like if you imagine two bundles of grass or leaning upon each other, so that they stand upright because they're leaning on each other. And that's the image that he uses to point out how consciousness and nama rupa, mind and body, how they sort of support each other and hold each other up. It's the two bundles of reeds leaning upon each other. Okay. So this is another way of expressing the codependency of name and form and consciousness, nama rupa and vijnana. These mental formations are based upon intention, will or volition, direction towards or away from a feeling or a perception, and attention, lingering and ruminating upon the same. These mental formations are based upon intention and attention. So intention is chaitana and attention is manasikara. And that attention, lingering and ruminating upon the same. They are the source of our mental monologue, which describes and directs our experience of the world. However, when we no longer cling to our feelings and perceptions, when they are seen as ephemeral, the mind's intention and attention is no longer fixed upon them. There is the experience of cessation or emptiness described in the Kevadda Sutta as signless, boundless, all-luminous. It's the Vinyanang Anidasanang Anantang Sabato Pabang. Signless, Anidasana, boundless, Ananta, and all-luminous, Sabato Pabang. In brief, phenomena occur when there is both the arising of certain conditions and the mind holding them. Dependent on ignorance are sankhara. Dependent on sankhara is consciousness. Dependent on consciousness is name and form, as it says in Dependent Origination. But, quote, with the cessation of ignorance is the cessation of name and form. For this reason, to the awakened, no phenomena fundamentally exist, quote unquote. Buddhas only hold to conventional reality out of compassion for beings. So when the Buddha says, that woman there, or that man who's over there, or this person, when somebody asks the Buddha, well, you keep saying all dhammas are not self, but how come you use personal pronouns? You say that woman Ruki or that man John. How come you use personal pronouns and names and such like, if all dhammas are not self? And then the Buddha says quite explicitly, I merely employ the common usages of the world, but those ordinary usages of language are used without delusion. They're employed without confusion or without ascribing any kind of permanent self to them. The deepening practice of insight penetrates the very way that the apparent subject sees things. Everything that arises, be it an attachment, an impulse, good or bad, has the nature to pass away. That doesn't mean that we disapprove of them or we want to get rid of them. It's just the way it is. This shakes the basis for the belief in attachment. It's not that we have yet to find the right object and that we should attach to the Buddha or meditation or to the desire to attain Nibbana rather than go to a football game. It's not about becoming a good Buddhist meditator so that you can become enlightened. It's just the realization in the moment that one never can really get hold of anything. It's all ephemeral. It is finally impossible to become anything. There is only true being with all its potential. The whole appearance of becoming something at all has been an illusion fostered by the sleight of hand of the whirling khandhas. We can't really be born into anything. Our true nature is deathless. And in that comment, it's impossible to become anything. So that all things are impermanent. So anything that you become is in a constant state of change. It doesn't even sit still as being a permanent thing for any significant period of time. And there's a passage that is attributed to Huineng, the sixth patriarch of the Chan tradition in China. It's quoted by Alan Watts, but it's difficult to find where it might have come from in Huineng's actual sutra. So it might have been Alan Watts riffing on the theme of Huineng, but it's a very wonderful teaching, but it's also true to form of that insight. And it says, in this moment, there is no thing that comes to be. In this moment, there is no thing that ceases to be. Thus, in this moment, there is no birth and death to be brought to an end. You can follow the logic. There's no real thing that comes to be. There's no real thing that ends. So there is no birth and death to be brought to an end. Therefore, this moment is the absolute peace. And even though it is just moment, there is no limit to this moment. And herein is eternal delight. So in that letting go of over there is satisfaction when I become that, when I get to be a good meditator, when I get my practice together, or when I get over this illness, or when I have dealt with this difficult doubt, or this particular imperfection, then over there I will. And those of you who've been around Lumpur Sumedho for any amount of time, pretty much every single Dhamma talk in the last 20 years, since about 1991, when we put together this collected teachings of Lumpur Sumedho, his teachings were quite varied and quite illustrated. He used to use a lot of analogies and anecdotes and stories of various different kinds, up to about 1991. And after 1991, he pretty much, as Ajahn Sucitto put it with inimitable skill and love for our dear teacher, he said, basically it's be awake with various different kinds of gravy. That's pretty much it. Every Dhamma talk that Lumpur Sumedho gave from the early 90s on was be awake. There isn't anything to become. There's nothing to practice. Just be awake. Look at the habit of thinking that you're a person who needs to do something to become enlightened in the future. No, be awake now. And it was quite amazing going through his teachings in a systematic way. We put together, I think it was something like, it was over 85 or 88 separate Dhamma talks and interviews, and pretty much from 1991 onwards, that's 95% of every Dhamma talk he gave. Any of you who've been around him in recent years will realize, yeah, that's right. To think I've got to do something now in order to become enlightened in the future is the wrong view. Be awake now. That's the entire practice. And that as soon as you think that you're an imperfect person who's got to get rid of your problems in order to become enlightened, that in the future, then you've already grasped the actuality incorrectly. And so rather than I'm an imperfect person who's got to get rid of their problems, who's got to become enlightened in the future, to know that's a thought, to be awake to that as a thought, that is the entirety of the practice. And so that quality of being awake, as he says, our true nature is the deathless. So that quality of wakefulness, being awake, that is that primary attribute of that deathless, unborn, undying nature. And that over and over again, and countless times, this has been reiterated, particularly by Lumpur Sumedho, just doing that, being awake, waking up to the fact that no, you never were a born being. You just thought you were. It's like that we have this impression that we were born and that we'll die, but that's just a mistaken point of view. And so, like another analogy that I like to give is, we say the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, only if you sit on the surface of this planet. If you take the position of the sun is not doing any rising or setting. It's just there. It rises and sets because of the position it's seen from, because of the spinning, our attachment to one spot on the surface of the spinning earth. And so we say, but rising and setting, birth and death. So because of the mind's attachments to the beginnings and endings, successes and failures, births and deaths, then we say, oh, that's an inhalation beginning, that's an inhalation ending, that's a body being born, a body dying. That birth and that death are only have validity if there's attachment to them. If you, just like letting go of the surface of the earth and taking the position of the sun, what does the sun know of its rising and setting? And I was talking about last night in that Dhamma talk about dasaniya. That was really this exactly that quality of sort of revisioning things, sitting on the floor of her room in the middle of the night with Sister Jitapala and I think Sister Jyotika and Ajahn Chandapalo. It was really obvious that, oh well, a body's born, a body breathes, a body stops breathing. So, what's that got to do with anything real? And that quality of of awareness, of knowing, that is the genuine refuge. That is the secure place. And when we talk about the island, or using that image that the Buddha gave for Nibbana, he said there is an island that you cannot go beyond. It is a place of no thingness. It's a place of non-attachment. And this, I tell you, is the end of suffering. That quality of awareness is the island that you cannot go beyond. Like you can't get behind awareness to look at awareness, because the awareness is the sort of the back wall of experience. And so that image of the island that you cannot go beyond, that is the true refuge, that quality of awakened awareness, of knowing, is the island itself. The insight into Dhamma shakes the view of a self. It is from that view that one needs to be liberated. The progressive experience of insight is one in which one's world does get rattled, for the better. Ideas about the kind of person one is, what one should be, or the way the world is, or should be, are all seen as impermanent and ephemeral. However, when the normal outlets for attachment and becoming no longer provide valid possibilities, the mind will produce fantasies, memories, sometimes peculiar visions and voices, anything to arouse desire, fear, anxiety, or interest, and anchor it to a realm of self. So those of us who've been here on this winter retreat time, and spending many hours doing sitting meditation, walking meditation, you can feel, and this describes it very accurately, where the mind is just looking for something. You sit there watching the flow of experience and saying no, 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 and a desire comes up, no, and, a fear comes up, no, and aversion comes up, no, an opinion comes up, no, a wonderful poetic formation arises, no, a regret, no, a hope, a plan, no, and so you keep saying no. All sankharas are empty and unsatisfactory, and then that starts to really rattle the habits of self-view, and you get this kind of desperation, like the mind is just hunting for something, anything. Let's just give me something to identify with. Like, can I have a disease? Yeah, I got. Yeah, what's that feeling? Yeah, I'm sure I've got a terrible illness, or or like, I really should think about what I'm going to do in April. After and who's going to be the work monk? Who is going to be the work monk? And then, right, great, it's a legal problem for me to think about. Yeah, it's a legitimate thing for me to create myself out of. Great! And anything will do. A regret, a hope, a plan, a crime, a success, an achievement. The desire mind is completely shameless. Anything will do. It's like hunting through the attic, looking for something to get interested in. And it's amazing how something that you in your heart of hearts you really don't care about. Yes, you really don't. And how the mind jumps on it and says, yeah, that'll do, great, fantastic. And it's just something to push against, so it feels like there's somebody who's doing some pushing. And that's all it is. It's just the hunger of, it's like looking for a fix, the self-view, looking for a fix of its drug of choice, bhava tanha. And that's all it is. And so that's one of the reasons why we use this kind of phrase, like the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. That's the medicine of the forest tradition and the Dhutanga life is there's a friction there. There's a frustration or a tension. There's dukkha, but it's dukkha that leads to the end of dukkha. That sense of being able to stand in that current, that sort of blizzard of but I want, and maybe I could, and just to feel that the current of desires and fears and hopes, and just to know this is just the desire mind looking for an object. That's all. No need to run away, no need to grab hold, no need to create an identity. It's just the flow of the self-creating habit. That's all. Anything to arouse desire, fear, anxiety, or interest. And you can tell when the mind is doing that, because even when it's something that you feel really bad about, I spoke really badly to Ruki the other day. I really upset her. I should really write an apology to her. Yeah, I wasn't very kind. And even though you're feeling bad about it, something is going, yes, great, I've got an excuse to be. I've hurt someone's feelings. Great! Because it's given you a legal excuse to be somebody who's hurt somebody else's feelings and then has to apologize and make it all right. And when you say, no, I'm pretty sure a rookie wouldn't even have noticed. And actually, that's probably just your projection looking for an object. And then when you bring that kind of reflection to the impulse, you can hear this, you can feel this sort of, no, that was a good one, don't take it away from me. That has some possibilities. And we long for those kind of unrequitable loves, or that you're never going to see her or him ever again. It's not requitable. You can't, or some wrongdoing that can't be fixed. There can be this yes, that can never be mended. Great, it's an indelible scar. And it's delightful because it gives the mind a perfect excuse. That's a real responsibility. That is my son, and I've got to worry about him. Yes. And the conditioning of society and your own instincts, and say, "Oh yes, you should. It's your son. You should be upset. You should be care. You should care." But along with the actuality of useful caring, there's this sense of, yes, I've got an excuse to be some person, to be this thing. And then around the wheel we go. The Bhava Chakra spins on. Doesn't matter what it is. You can think the most ridiculous thoughts and have the most bizarre cravings for things that you would never have dreamed of before you began to practice Dhamma. The self-view in the mind will come up with anxiety. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe I'm really a brutal person underneath it all. Maybe the karma from a past life as a dope peddler is catching up with me. Then there are also mystical perceptions. Maybe I am destined to be the new world teacher. The masters on the 7th level are communicating through me. Anything will do, no matter how corny, to reinforce the mind's view of self. As we begin to see how ruthless and creative the force of attachment is, we can more readily accept that the whole of this show is just movement of the khandhas. As such, there is only one real alternative to spinning on the wheel of becoming, and that's to get to the heart of all this movement and to abide in that which can know it all. To get to the heart of all this movement and to abide in that which can know it all. We do this not by taking issue with the creations of the mind, but by investigating what they are all based upon. What do conditions depend on? What is the root of all these sankhara? The root of it all is always ignorance, unknowing. That unknowing of truth stimulates the outflows that imprint personal projections and biases onto the world we experience. So, rather than create desires, hopes, aversions and probabilities, we activate the principle of knowing. In iconographic terms, in terms of the pictures he put together, this means putting the Buddha at the center of the world system as he is in this painting, with his hands in the mudra that the Buddhas used to signify suchness, unbiased attention. And that suchness mudra, the tatata, which is the word for suchness, I'm sure you can't see from there, but he has these two hands at the center, and the suchness mudra is such. That's the suchness mudra. Just like that. Thus, such. So, his hands in the mudra that Buddhas used to signify suchness, unbiased attention. Through cultivating suchness, we can purify sanya and sankhara. We're not trying to destroy the khandhas. The purification is that the perceptions are no longer accumulated to create a personal, habitual world. Instead of perceptions, there is the moment-by-moment act of perceiving. Pure recognition has a delightful quality to it, a radiant quality, where all the accumulated perceptions are purified, and one sees things with greater clarity. This purification is also in terms of intention and attention, the primary sources of sankhara. With intention towards truth, towards dispassionate seeing and attending to things as they are, rather than how we want things to be, the tendency to build perceptions out of wrong self-view can cease. Then clearer perceptions and selfless motivation can give rise to what is lovely in the world in terms of attitude, speech and action. And that is the theme of the next painting. So I'll read that last couple of sentences again, as it was a bit, there's a lot of things in there, a bit packed. Pure recognition has a delightful quality to it, a radiant quality where all the accumulated perceptions are purified and one sees things with greater clarity. And that's also, that purification is also a quality of simplicity. So normally when we perceive things, we bunch into them the clustering of all our likes and dislikes and opinions of what's gone before, either recently or remotely. And so bringing to the perception of this encounter, this particular moment, we've got our memories of what the reading said earlier, or what was happening earlier today in the funeral of Glyn Manson, and what conversation you had in the kitchen earlier today, and what the readings were yesterday and the day before and the day before, and then what you're going to do after the reading is over, or trying to figure out as I'm talking about what was he talking about there, or what's attention and intention, and aren't they the same, and how are they? So around the present moment, there's this clustering and blurring that comes from memory, imagination, conceptual proliferation. So that quality of purifying perception or purifying mental formations, it's in a way, it's simplifying is probably a more accurate term, because the mind is not carrying so much from the past or projecting and creating so much about an imagined future. And again, as Luang Por Sumedho would say so often, or the past is a memory, or yesterday is a memory, the future is the unknown, now is the knowing. So the more that we take that down to this moment, rather than what was said 10 seconds ago, or let alone a day ago, or what is going to happen, then even with multifaceted perceptions, many people being present, or lots of different sounds or images, or different qualities of thought or idea, there can be a tremendous simplicity. And one of the epithets of the Buddha, the qualities that describe the Buddha, was nippapancha, one who is free from proliferation, from complexity. Now, the Buddha had a mind that was extraordinarily capable of great, not just imaginative sweeps. There's these Dhamma talks where he says, there are 11 factors in taking care of cows, which are comparable to the factors that are necessary for looking after the mind, and they are and he gives you a discourse on looking on cow husbandry, looking after. If you're a good cow herd, this is what you look out for, and just boom, 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 boom. It comes up with this perfect list, and then how that relates to guiding particular mind states and carrying out aspects of conduct and meditation, just seemingly out of nowhere. And he said, these things occur to me as I say them. And also his ability to see into multiple worlds and read the minds of other beings, and so his mind was capable of encompassing huge degrees of variety of experiences, but there was nippapancha, there was no complication. So the mind that's perfectly simple is able to contain massive complexity. It's able to contain universes without being confused by them. So that when he says purifying, it's I feel that's in a way being purified from the accretions of the imagined past and future, but the simplicity of being awake to the present. So with the intention towards truth, towards dispassionate seeing and attending to things as they are, again, rather than how we want things to be, or they could be or should be. So attending to things as they are, the tendency to build perceptions out of wrong view can cease. Then clearer perceptions and selfless motivation can give rise to what is lovely in the world in terms of attitude, speech and action. So when the mind is is attuned to the present, and just takes care of one thing, like taking a sip of water when you need a sip of water, and not thinking about what you're going to say next, then the way things take shape is guided by what the moment really needs, not with my ideas about what I think you need or what will be useful, but a real attunement to the time, the place, the situation, and what's necessary. And so, as you said, the clearer perceptions and selfless motivation give rise to what is lovely in the world in terms of attitude, speech, and action. So when the mind is guided by ignorance and self-view, then what guides our actions and our speech is what I should do, or what I think you want to hear, or what I've been told to do, or my habits, and what I want to get, or what I want to get away from, so that our efforts and our actions are constantly guided by self-view. What I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing. But then the more that there's a clear vision, then what guides action is satipanya, mindfulness and wisdom, unclouded by self-view and an attunement to the time and the place and the people that you're with. And so we won't go on to the next painting, but we'll draw it to a close right there. So if anybody has any questions or things that would be useful to clarify, then you forgive me for using you as a sample rookie, conveniently there in the front row. So.
One second asking this, but attention and intention, how do you call them?
Attention is manasikara, intention is cetana.
So the chitta and the iddhipada is also intention?
Nope.
The fourth, the third one?
No, that's thinking. That's in the four bases of success. That citta, in that respect, is thinking about what it is that you want to do. If you want to cook some rice, then you've got to think about, okay, now where is the rice in this kitchen? Where is the rice stored? Now, which hob is not being used? Who's the head cook today? That I should ask. Before I start cooking, I should ask them. So it's thinking things through. It's very simple. So you have to think about, okay, now, well, like the example that the Buddha gives in terms of going to Savatthi, or I think when he's talking about, Ananda is talking about it. So well, you had to want to come to the park. So you had to think about, okay, now where am I starting from? Where am I? No, it wasn't Savatthi, it was Kosambi. Okay, where am I starting from? Okay, how do I get to Gosita's Park from where I am? So it's very practical. It's just, okay, I want to undertake this particular job. What's the way to do it? So you're just mapping out what is necessary and thinking things through, and then so the intention is more in the interest and then the energy. So the chanda, that you're interested in cooking, and so the driving force comes from the interest, and then virya, the energy that you apply to that. But the citta bit is just figuring out how you're going to do it, or if it's doable.
Intention is your self-will.
Well, no, intention, cetana, doesn't have to be guided by self-view. The Buddha intended to spread the Dhamma. There was he used a lot of cetana, but that's not. If there is, if the heart is free of ignorance, then the cetana is guided by mindfulness and wisdom. If there is still ignorance, then the cetana is often just guided by habit, by fear or desire or aversion or social pressure and so on. But the more that the mind is liberated, then the more that the cetana is just formed in and guided by mindfulness and wisdom.
when you take the Eightfold Path, you have right understanding and then right aspiration, right intention. So in a way, it can come from thinking, from inside. It can form the intention to do something.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. Samma sankapo, right resolution. So the in the Eightfold Path, and that's it's characterized in that way. But it's the when that is samma sankappa. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, because it's really
Whether intention and aspiration, it's kind of.
Yeah, I'd say they're very close. Yeah.
And in my understanding, I mean, I may be wrong. The aspiration, intention comes from right aspiration, right intention comes from right understanding. So there is a kind of thinking process, mind process, which leads to.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. That they're kind of supporting each other along the way. But in the four iddhipada, that particular expression, then the citta part, at least as I understand it, just refers to and the way it's described in that when Ananda's using the example of, he's talking to a layman who's come to the Gosita-rama, and he said, well, look, you had to think about how to get here, didn't you? That's the third iddhipada. That's how Ananda explains the third iddhipada. So he said, you had to want to come to the park. That's you're interested to come to the park, right? So that was the first one, the chanda. And then you had to walk. You had to apply energy to sort of get up and decide to make the journey to get there. And then you also had to think, okay, now what's the best way to walk to the Gosita-rama? So that's in that particular example how he describes it. And then vimamsa is, okay, did I get to the Gosita-rama? Yes, I did. So it's like looking at the results of the action. But in any aspect of the Eightfold Path, that's why the wheel is the best symbol for the Eightfold Path, because all the spokes support the rim, and that even though they're individual spokes, it's not that right view is solely functions as the precursor to right resolution or right intention. They all support the same rim, and that there is an order, but they're also feeding on each other and supporting each other in various ways throughout the application of the path.